Why is the US so determined to slow down or even stop China's rise? Is it about trade, security, or is it something deeper? Kishore Mahbubani, a seasoned diplomat and one of Asia's most respected geopolitical thinkers, believes it's not just about China, it's about history, power, and fear. Let's explore what he says and what he reveals about the true reasons behind the US's stance toward China. As Mobubani puts it, this is not just about power competition, it's the story of a global shift that the West is struggling to accept. To begin understanding the US China tension, Kishore encourages us to zoom out, far out, not just across decades, but across centuries of human history. Before we can talk meaningfully about the future, he insists we must first understand the past. That's when he introduces one of his most provocative and foundational ideas. He says, the West has had an incredible run for 200 years. It controlled the world, but now history is returning. What does he mean by that? Kishore reminds us that Western dominance is not the norm, it's the exception. For most recorded history, the global economic and cultural center of gravity was not in Europe or North America, but in Asia, specifically China and India. These civilizations consistently held the largest shares of global GDP, drove innovation in agriculture, governance, and technology, and philosophy, and maintained complex bureaucracies and educational systems that deeply influenced their neighbors. For example, in 1820, before the Industrial Revolution had fully transformed the West, China alone accounted for nearly 30% of global GDP, while India made up about 15%. Together, they represented nearly half of the world economy. This wasn't a fluke, but a result of centuries of stability, expansive trade routes like the Silk Road, and sophisticated societies that valued scholarship and innovation. This dominance was not merely economic. Chinese civilization gave the world the compass, gunpowder, paper making, and printing. Confucian governance philosophies influenced not only China, but Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. Then came a cataclysmic rupture, the century of humiliation, a period spanning from the early 19th century to the mid 20th century, when Western imperial powers and later Japan imposed their will on China through military force, unequal treaties, and territorial seizures. So when Mabubani says history is returning, he's not claiming that China's rise is unnatural or sudden. He's challenging the idea that it's even a rise at all. In his view, China is not breaking the mold, it's reclaiming a place it historically occupied. From this perspective, the last 200 years of Western supremacy were a historical anomaly rather than a permanent shift. This reframing compels us to rethink the narrative rather than viewing China's growing influence as a threat or a new development. Babani invites us to see it as a restoration, a civilizational comeback after a deeply traumatic detour. Isn't that a radically different way to understand the global power shift? Now, if China is just reclaiming the past, why is the US reacting to China's rise? To understand that, Mabubani guides us into a deeper insight about the psychology of superpowers. He says, no civilization can dominate the world forever. Here, Mabubani is pointing to a reality that many in the West are reluctant to face. The US is not used to being challenged. Since the end of World War II, it has held unmatched power in global politics, economics, and culture. But now, with China catching up or even surpassing in certain areas, the US feels threatened, not because China is violating the rules, but because it's winning by the rules. And that, Mobani says, is where the fear lies. Take Huawei as a striking example. When this Chinese tech giant began outperforming American firms in 5G, instead of competing, they disbanded. Why not compete openly? Why use politics instead of innovation? Mahbubani suggests it's because the US fears losing its technological edge, and by extension, its global influence. This fear becomes even clearer when we look at the heated battlegrounds today. Semiconductors. The US has imposed sweeping export bans on advanced chips and chips making equipment going to China. Companies like ASML in the Netherlands have been pressured not to sell key technology to Chinese firms. Before quoting Mahbubani, let's consider the consequences. This is not just about slowing down tech, it's about cutting off China's future growth. Then Mahbubani asked a tough question. If America truly believes in free market competition, why not let Huawei compete? Because it exposes the contradiction. If the US claims to stand for open competition, then using government sanctions to stop a rival seems more like protectionism rather than principle. Mahbubani points out the strategy doesn't weaken China, it only motivates it to build its own supply chains and move forward. Self sufficiency faster than ever before. So, is the US playing defense or shooting itself in the foot? Let's shift gears and look at global institutions. For decades, the US promoted a rules based international order. But Mahbubani says it only follows the rules when they serve its interests. He puts it bluntly, the West believes in a rules based order, but only when the rules work in their favor. Let's talk numbers. Real, hard, undeniable numbers. China has lifted more than 800 million out of poverty in just 40 years. It's built the world's largest high speed rail network, produced world class universities, and become a hub for innovation. So Mahbubani challenges the West with this thought. America's biggest mistake is assuming it can stop 1.4 billion people from succeeding. Think about that. This is not just about one party, one leader, or one industry. It's about an entire civilization determined to rise again. Trying to hold that momentum, Mahbubani says, is like trying to stop a tidal wave with a sandcastle. It's not just impractical, it's dangerous. Now comes a question many Western analysts avoid. Why hasn't China adopted liberal democracy? And Mahbubani offers a striking explanation. He says, the Chinese people want stability, progress, and pride, not necessarily Western values. This isn't a rejection of democracy, but a recognition that each civilization follows its own path. China has prioritized development, state order, and national dignity. For many Chinese, what matters most is ending poverty, ensuring education, and avoiding chaos, not holding elections every 4 years. This doesn't mean one system is better. It means there is more than one way to build a successful society. And that, Mahbubani says, threatens the US in a different way because it undermines the idea that the Western model is the only path to prosperity. Finally, Mahbubani offers a hopeful message. We are entering a multipolar world. West must learn to share power. This is not about China taking over. It's about creating a world where no single power dominates and where dialogue and respect replace domination and fear. But can the US accept this? Can it evolve from global hegemon to global partner? That, Mubani says, is the real test ahead. So, what do you think? Is China's rise really the threat, or is it the fear of losing control that drives the US response? Can the world find a way to balance power peacefully, or are we heading toward a bigger confrontation? Let us know in the comments.